basically what we're doing is we're separating audio and giving it to you in its components so that then you have much more control and usability over that audio.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Slator Pod. Today on the podcast, we welcome Jessica Powell. She's the CEO of language tech platform AudioShake. So for those of you who don't know AudioShake, they specialize in AI audio separation. And I had to do a bit of digging and reading up on audio separation before this podcast to get myself up to speed. Very, very interesting company, story, use case. So yeah, hi Jessica, and thanks so much for joining.
Hi, nice to meet you.
We always ask where in the world our guests are recording this from today. So where are you based, Jessica? Where are you recording this from?
I'm in San Francisco.
San Francisco, the heart of it all. All right. So before we start, for those of our listeners who don't know what AudioShake does, give us the kind of elevator pitch, the 30-second, 1-minute elevator pitch to set the scene.
Oh my gosh, being in San Francisco, you have to elevator pitch all the time. So how about I not give you the elevator pitch, but some other version of it? What we do is we help make audio more usable for both human and machine workflows. That may still sound a little abstract. My parents always say it is. But what it essentially is we use audio separation. It's a field of AI known as source separation to separate mixed audio into its component parts. So that could mean in a broadcast that you're separating out the crowd noise, the sound of the squeaks of the shoes on the basketball court and the commentators. And meanwhile, there's Kendrick Lamar rapping in the background. We can separate all of those elements out. And that just gives you a lot more control over what you do with that audio. So everything from workflows where you're just needing to boost or lower certain sounds, or you need to clean audio before it goes through other pipelines. Think of transcription and captioning, of course. Or where you simply need editing control in superhuman, DAW-heavy editing workflows. For example, you're separating dialogue and M&E for a production, and because you want to take that program into other languages. So basically what we're doing is we're separating audio and giving it to you in its components so that then you have much more control and usability over that audio.
Now, there's a pretty big, interesting origin story behind the product. So maybe tell us a bit more about that, how you came up with that idea originally, and also just a bit about your background before co-founding AudioShake. I think you were with Google for quite some time. So just tell us a bit more about the background and then the origin story there.
Sure. Yeah, I was at Google for most of my career. Started at Google in London and then ended up in Tokyo and then finally in out here in the Bay Area with Google. Did a whole bunch of different things there, but my final years there, I was running communications across the company. And then when I was in Tokyo, though, and my co-founder was there as well, did a lot of karaoke. You do a lot of karaoke when you're in Japan for business, for social, whatever it might be. And it was very, very fun. I discovered I love karaoke. But we'd always wished that we could sing along to any song, not just the songs, the re-records that are in those karaoke books that they give you. And so one of 1,000 silly ideas that we had, probably drunk while doing karaoke, was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could rip the vocals off of any song so you could karaoke to any song? I don't want to pretend that the heavens opened up and then all of a sudden we were like, let's start a company to create No, it wasn't anything like that. It was just this idea that we had. And then we both ended up back in the Bay Area. I was at Google. Luke, my co-founder, was at Plaid, which is a fintech company out here. And he was already working on the AI side, leading data science there. And one day he came to me, he said, remember that silly idea that we had in Tokyo about being able to separate songs? I think deep learning's gotten to the point where we could do that. And so just for fun, we started experimenting with that problem. And the first few passes that we had at it sounded pretty terrible, but we were still really excited because very quickly we thought, well, if you could do this for a song, say remove the vocals, why couldn't you separate all the instruments? If you could separate all the instruments, why couldn't you separate all kinds of sound? And we got really, really excited because sound is working in sound, you're dealing with a ton of noise, a ton of frequency overlap. And if you can figure out, for example, how to distinguish a piano from a guitar, that means that you have a pretty sophisticated system that can then be applied elsewhere to other kinds of sounds.
I want to take a step back even further before we go into the product in more detail. Like, I looked up at your LinkedIn profile, and you studied at Uni Fribourg in Switzerland. So I'm like,
Yeah.
how did that happen? That's yeah. Tell us more about that.
I feel like the good answer would be something like, as a little girl, I always wanted to, I don't know, I read Heidi or I don't know, right? Like it'd be but it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with like a terrible relationship and a boy, which was that I was dating a guy in Spain and we broke up. And I think I had like $100. And this was right after college. And I used that $100 to buy a train ticket to where my aunt and uncle live. And they're in kind of in the Gruyere like region. And I sort of showed up on their doorstep, which I'm sure they loved, and it was just like this moody, heartbroken person, and traipsed around the pre-Alps for like 2 weeks, just, like wallowing in my misery. And then my aunt was kind of like, you're 21 and you need a job. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And I was like, I don't know. Like I didn't know. And she worked in Fribourg, and so she had gone by the university there and seen that there was still a program that was open, and it was in pedagogy, which I'm sure for the European audience, everyone knows what pedagogy is, but it's not a word. Well, it's English. It's not a word you use that much in English in your day to day, at least in America. So I didn't even know what pedagogy meant. I didn't know it was just like another way of saying like an education degree. And I also didn't really speak any French, which was also a problem for doing a degree in French. But I did speak Spanish, and the test to get in was a written test. And so I relied very heavily on cognates and somehow squeezed into a program where I ended up doing a DEA, which I guess is kind of like anyway, I did some sort of degree or certificate and at the university. It was a great experience, and I did learn French as part of that humiliating journey, being in a program
Does
to
help. Does
teach
help.
French when you didn't know French. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Google's got a big presence here in Zurich. Obviously, it's probably one of the top employers. So not in Fribourg, but here, close, right? 1 hour by train, 1.5. All right, let's get back to AudioShake and the product. So, like you mentioned, the original use case that you had in mind in the karaoke, but how, like, at what point did you realize that this was like bigger when you started the company, bigger than maybe the music use case? And then, yeah, tell us a bit more about like the other areas where it found traction.
Well, we started again, I think from the very start, sitting out here in the valley, and working so like every single day with code, right? I think our heads pretty immediately went to like what could you do with sound if you could work with it in a programming environment, right? If you had essentially structured data that would allow you to deal with audio in a reliable way. That was always sort of front and center in our minds. But we did start with music because we're both musicians. We were really interested in music, and again, we weren't really trying to start a company. It was like a fun hobby kind of thing. Um, but when we started first working, we and again, actually, maybe this is relevant. When we started, we weren't thinking we were starting a company. We thought it was just a fun party trick. We showed it to friends that were in the music industry, and we had already thought about things like remixing and stuff like that. But they were like, "Yeah, but have you heard about sync licensing?" Or anything the move that's happening towards like 5.1 mixes and immersive mixing. That stuff was all, again, we played music as hobbyists, but that stuff was all kind of industry type stuff. It wasn't anything that we were actively thinking about. But that got us excited that there actually was a market and an interest in stems and like separated sound. And so we went and spoke to some sync companies or sync departments at like the majors, and everyone was immediately interested. And so that was our entry point, was music. And then, from the sync, it then spread into other departments like A&R that would be working on things like creative remixing. And while we were doing that, the film people found us and they said, well, wait, if you could separate film, like if you can separate music, couldn't you separate like M&E tracks? And we were like, well, yeah, it's not entirely the same, but there's a lot of overlap there and that kind of problem. And so we very naturally got pulled into like M&E separation as well. And the very first project we did was actually Doctor Who, the kind of iconic BBC show. They wanted to bring it into, someone had purchased the rights in Germany, wanted to bring it into German, and all they had was the director's cut. So, director's commentary, the original dialogue, and all of that great sci fi soundtrack. all on the same track. And so that's where we came in, is we isolated the different components so that they could then put German, a human German dub on top of that.
That's so interesting. Can you just dwell on that a little bit? So basically, the challenge was they just had the master giant file, and yeah, it was just okay. It was very, very hard. So technically, for you, and I want to talk about kind of the streaming component here as well. But this obviously is not like mission critical that it's fast. It just has to be super high quality first, right? And I heard you talk on another podcast. Initially, was really the focus was on super high quality, and then some of the other use cases where the speed was relevant came later.
Yeah, I mean, quality is still our North Star on everything. You know, when you're talking about artistic workflows in particular, well, artistic workflows or a workflow in which separation is some component of a larger pipeline. And if you don't separate properly, you've all these downstream effects. We can talk about transcription and ASR accuracy in a moment, but that would be a really good example of that. Um, Quality is paramount, right? That's why people use AudioShake, is that we're the best at what we do, and we, have our own models, and we've spent years investing in the research to build really, really great separation. Um, but the initial workflows we were in were all post-production workflows. So again, on the music side, the track was already out there, and now you're just trying to find a new way to license it, and splitting that track into the instrumental and the vocals, or the different instrument stems, now opens up that track for sync licensing, which is not always an open opportunity for older music, for example, kind of pre 2015. Um, and then similar parallels, of course, on like the film and TV side, right? Um, then as we got better and better at building these models, we did start to get a lot of incoming around faster workflows. So examples of that would be kind of on the extreme end. You would just think of anything that's in real time, where you're taking a streamed file coming in and being able to separate that. So for example, now we work with broadcasters where we are isolating dialogue. And there we can go as low as like 11 milliseconds. So we can take a live stream, like a live feed, isolate the dialogue, and allow you to then, again, control the levels. And if you're ever watching a sports match, for example, and you can't hear the ref's call because the crowd is so loud, that would be a good example of where you might use it. Or there's bleed from, again, the crowd into the dialogue track. You can now split all of that. Um, we can also remove music in real time. So music that's caught in the background, again, if we're thinking about sports and broadcast, all of those things, we have now models, special models that allow it to work with streamed audio. So there, the performance aspect or the speed aspect is really, really important. You have to do different kinds of things to these models to get them to be like sufficiently lightweight to work in those environments. But we now today work both in post-production and live. So, but they're sort of different model architectures depending on the use case.
Yeah, so when we did the research for this podcast, we also saw that you have a partnership with AI Media, the Australian company. So that what you just described, that would be, I think you're integrated into their Lexi voice workflow. So the whole broadcasting, would that be where part of it would go via like an AI Media partnership?
They're unveiling a bunch of different things at NAB coming up, so I think I should let them speak to that. But what I can talk about more generally that we do with them, which is already public, is this actually goes back to the ASR point that I mentioned earlier. One of the big challenges with captioning media is that media, again, we think of it as really rich and beautiful and creative sound. From a sound separation perspective, it's a lot of noise, right? It's not a clean feed the way you and me talking right now on a podcast that's going to be tracked out, where I have my recording and you have your recording. We're both mic'd up. We both have headsets of some kind. Um, that's sort of like an ideal recording environment, right? But so much that happens in the media world is not like that. So you can think of on-set sound, or again, think of a sports stadium. There's so much uncontrollable sound and frequency overlap. If you try and take that raw audio and feed it into a transcription and captioning system, quite a bit, you're going to have a lot of errors in accuracy that you wouldn't have in a clean environment like this podcast right now. Even now, if you and I started talking over each other, that can create problems. But But if we, again, think about like where AI media is doing a lot of work, it's in these really rich media environments. And so if you can isolate the components of audio before it goes through transcription and captioning, you're going to have a clean input. That means then that your ASR system is operating at its very, very best level. And so that's where we contribute.
Got it. And I want to explore the film side as well, and maybe the localization use case. So
Yeah.
the Doctor Who you just mentioned before, but can you tell us a bit more, like what do you do in localization? How is AudioShake relevant to these localization generally use cases beyond having a rich catalog that needs to be backed up or yeah.
I mean, a lot of your listeners are bigger experts in this than I am, but I'll just speak to it from the perspective, like the workflows that we get involved in. I'd say the most common ones we see are certainly dialogue and M&E separation. Like that's kind of obvious why you would need to do that for older content, right? And that it's all in one track. That Doctor Who is a good example. There's no way, the way that, as I understand it, localization used to happen, um, is that you would just basically silence the audio. So the way you would handle the fact that you didn't have multi-tracks or stems is that you would just silence all the audio and then have Florian speaking Swiss German across the track. And in some countries, as I understand it, they'd even have Florian doing all the voices of the track. Um, now you now are able to separate the dialogue, the music, and the effects. From there, it kind of depends on your workflow. I think if we're looking at entirely human or primarily human workflows, which is still the majority of what we see through AudioShake, is uh, even if AI is being used, there's human in the loop. But in these anyway, and in these workflows, you have your dialogue separated, you have your M&E. You're going to retain the M&E, and then you're going to take, say, the Swiss German, and you're then going to dub, like stitch together the Swiss German dub and the M&E together. If you were doing an AI workflow, you would take that dialogue isolation, you would run it through transcription and voice cloning and so forth. And then again, you're going to take that outputted cloned Swiss German, stitch it back together with the M&E. And then I know that there's some that are like 100% AI doing that and everything, but I think the majority of the work that we see tends to be either still 100% human or human but AI assisted at different points.
Very interesting. Have you ever come across like an AI interpreting or an interpreting use case, like live interpreting? For example, again, we did a research project some time ago for a client, and it was a little early, maybe like 1.5, 2 years ago. But the problem was that when you have like real life like remote interpreting sessions, sometimes the AI was like trying to translate the dog barking in the background, and it just kind of produced gibberish. So have you ever come across anything in that area? Has anybody ever approached you for that?
I haven't seen anything on live interpretation, but from the way you're describing it, that feels very solvable. You need to be able to tell the machine what to listen to and what to ignore, and then give it a clean input.
Can you walk us a bit more through the products? When we did the research, you have like a developer platform, you have AudioShake Live, you have an enterprise platform. Just try to untangle this a bit. Like how would how would somebody come to you with a problem? How would they interact with you? Would they be on a platform? Is it kind of is it a SaaS? Would they log in and use it? Just give us a bit more insights there.
Sure. We have an on-demand platform that is largely used by enterprises and companies working across the media and tech space. Tends to be used more on the, I guess, media side. It's like a drag and drop. You're pulling in your asset, you're telling us what you want to do with it, and then we're separating it for you. And we have models that can separate instruments, sure, but also can isolate dialogue, music, and effects, can remove music from an environment, but keep all the natural sound. So again, that's like a kind of a, how do you take older or catalog where the licensing has expired and then make it so that you don't have the copyrighted music in it and you can put in new, freshly licensed music. And then we have models that can separate multiple speakers. We also have models that are designed to boosts the intelligibility of a speaker's voice. And so that's particularly useful in really noisy recordings. Got one through last night. Normally this is all happening. I don't see the files and everything, but we had a special outreach from a customer that is does a lot of work in unscripted and documentary, and they had some very sensitive recordings tied to uh, different kinds of audio that was recorded, like via like an Alexa or a Siri type device, and wanted to see could we separate all the different voices so that you could extract some very sensitive kind of uh, like material from that. So you have that kind of thing can all just be uploaded to the site. We separate it. We don't retain that audio. We always still can do that on the API, and we also have again these real-time streaming technologies that people can implement as well.
When you say you separate it, like there is a human in the loop at that point still somewhere, or like that, and you just delivered a no, not at all
We don't have any humans working at AudioShake, including me.
for that.
Sorry. No, no, I'm human. The employees are human. There's no human in the loop in the AudioShake process. That's entirely deep learning. All of our human resources are going to building those models. When I was referring to human in the loop earlier, I was just talking about a lot of our media partners. Um, I think there was the hope when we first started, there was a lot of talk in the industry and customers that we would have about being able to fully automate like say localization pipelines. Um, and I think that some of uh, the companies we worked with that were in that space started off with 100% automation and found that you couldn't get the quality that you needed because there were just too many points of failure in orchestrating all of these different AI systems together. Then a lot of them moved into kind of human in the loop type scenarios where you might have AudioShake at the start where it's isolating it, then it's going to go through transcription. Your transcription is going to be boosted, but ASR still, even in clean environments like you and me talking right now, ASR can still fail, transcription can still fail. So having a human check on that, having a human check before, say, like a AI voice gets involved and after the voice is involved. So I think today what we primarily see are workflows that are either 100% human, meaning the separation is happening and they're keeping the M&E file and then they're having a human Swiss German dub on top of it, or the human in the loop AI workflows. But yeah, the audio shit component of it is an automated component.
When you're doing the separation of like the voices, does the language matter at all, or is it really doesn't matter at all? Like if it's like a bunch of English speakers and you're separating, or there are a bunch of, I don't know, Quechua speakers, would that matter?
It can matter, yeah, because it really matters when you're doing voice cloning, right? Which we don't do. But if you're doing voice AI, yes, like you would want to be able to train on Quechua as well as like Quebecois as well as Sitzerdeutsch, right? Like you want those accents and those inflections. That might matter a little bit less when you're talking about frequency overlap, but it does still matter. There's still cultural norms in how we speak and frequency differences in how we speak. And so data diversity also matters when you're training models in source separation.
So are there like any kind of technical metrics and like eval benchmarks that you're looking at, that you're tracking and like, benchmarking your progress? Because I think you posted somewhere that you came top in an evaluation of like models that Meta ran, but like what type of eval benchmarks are those?
Yeah, well, so generally, Meta created its own benchmarks. So
As they
that's
should.
well, so that's kind of a separate issue. But in terms of benchmarks that are used widely in the field, yes, we're state of the art. So we benchmark in source separation. It's something called the SDR score. That's what you use. We're state of the art on SDR. We look at like those. It's always helpful to have benchmarks because then you have some common thing that everyone's using, and there's some good to benchmarks because there's something that a benchmark is evaluating that probably is important to your system. At the same time, if you're talking about sound separation, um, and I would imagine the same would be if you were thinking about other kinds of audio components. If I think about, again, voice AI is not our field, but if I was thinking about voice AI, I imagine there are similar constraints. when you think about source separation, of course it matters how another machine is telling you, how did you score on this task? The problem is that there's also perception, and what a human perceives as high quality may be different from what a machine perceives as high quality, no matter how robust you try and make those benchmarks. So it's totally possible get to achieve great SDR scores, but not have output that sounds as good. So we've had models that scored higher on SDR, but that we don't deploy because we found another, like a better sounding model that that doesn't score as high SDR, but that we know in all of our listening tests has much better perceptual quality. So we use both of those. I think it's it's just sort of kind of, I think, part of running a business. Like you need to know what the field is doing. You want to use them like the same kind of language as the rest of your field, but you also have to develop ultimately for your customer and not for what a bunch of machines are saying is the best. Um, but yes, and then the Meta thing was a separate thing where they were using generative models to separate sound and segment sound and do a whole bunch of different tasks. And because of the nature of the task, they had to create entirely new benchmarks because the SDR would not actually be a good benchmark when you are essentially generating audio. So that's probably like a little too into the weeds, but yes, the on that particular meta evaluation, we did very well.
So you guys started in 2020, right? That's when you started the company?
I think it was later than that. We were,
Later?
yeah, who knows what LinkedIn or other things say. We were playing around with models then.
I'm trying to set up because basically, like, okay, there's starting an AI company before kind of ChatGPT and one after, right? So there's live
Oh,
before and
yeah.
live after. So, like, if you started before and you had to kind of power through that, like, how was that? If you did, like, you're building something in the AI space, and then boom, this kind of revolution happens. Yeah, is that something that kind of shaped the trajectory, or you were like kind of at that time when it hit, it was still very early days?
I think it was a net positive for us rather than negative, though it had it has its drawbacks too. I think on the positive side, when we first started, um, you know, I remember we went to raise money for the company out here in the valley, and everyone was just like, we hate music, we hate sound, we never want to hear about any of this, and like, why would you do this weird thing of separating sound? Um, and what was really helpful, I think, in the generative boom was that all of a sudden, and this wasn't right away, I would say this has been more in the past 2 years. Um, the same investors that didn't understand why anyone would care about audio, all of a sudden were like, oh, actually, if you're building a large generative model and it needs to understand the world, turns out audio is a pretty important input, to which anyone working in audio is like, yeah, duh, this is like, we have ears, you know, the same way that you would say video, like vision, is an important input to a system, right? But that wasn't the case at all, right? Like everyone thought we were just doing this very weird niche thing when we started. And so actually having the large models come along and start talking about multimodal and talk about um, helping machines understand the world was, I think, useful into just generally furthering the the understanding of audio AI, like the component of that. Um, where it was less helpful is, I suppose, a lot of times people assume what we do is generative. It's not. We don't add any information. We're working with existing audio. It's a totally different area of AI. Um, or they'll assume that we're working with models provided by the big tech companies. No, actually, those are our customers. Because again, what we do is just really, really different. So it has its advantages and disadvantages. But generally, I don't know. It's a pretty exciting time. It's pretty exciting to see what you can do when you can orchestrate these models together. And so it's cool being out here in San Francisco because you see it all kind of come together.
So then the narrative when you spoke to investors, yeah, as you said, changed a lot because you raised a Series A in October 2025, if our research is right. So was this kind of understanding the world? Was this part of the kind of the investor conversation? Because right now we have this like bifurcation, right? It's SaaS, and then or it's AI and everything else, right? And if you're in the
Yeah.
SaaS bucket, like, no, wait, no, hang on, we don't want to do SaaS, we don't want to invest in this, right? It's all going to be disrupted anyway. And if the AI bucket, probably, they're waiting in line to write the check.
I don't know. I know I keep hearing SaaS is dead. But at the same time I keep hearing that AI companies' revenue is fake. Like I just think there's all these different narratives. We have a large number of enterprise customers that have essentially subscriptions to AudioShake that I think you would call that a typical SaaS business. We also have lots of users who are AI native that are used to um, more like paying for processing and like very similar kinds of structures to how your listeners might consume any of if they're using an LLM at all. I think a nice thing about coming of age now and not inheriting a business structure that may be dated or it may not be, is it gives you the agility to adjust. And I think it also removes the baggage and wisdom sometimes, which is unfortunate, of having these preconceived notions of how you have to structure a business and how you have to run it. Um, I think a lot of the structures that are also created are entirely created to optimize for VC. Like they're arbitrary capitalist like structures, which like I'm not going on some rant about capitalism here. I'm just saying like in what world is it normal that there's this brand of muesli I like, and they're trying to push me into a subscription. Like, I don't ever need to have a muesli subscription ever in my life. And I'll buy the muesli and I'm happy to support the muesli company and I will be a good customer, but I don't need to receive it every Monday, right? And like there's so many bonkers constructs that happen across business just because of investors. And I think it's good for these different models to be thrown on their heads just to show how stupid some of them are. So I kind of welcome it. Ask me again in a year when I'm like freaking out about it. But right now I think it's fine.
Great take. Yeah, it's very. Yeah, I don't need a muesli subscription either, even though it's a Swiss German word. It's one of the very few Swiss German words that made it into the English language, right? Um, so I want to close on, like you mentioned that you have a large number of enterprise customers. How did you get them? I mean, like, what's the go to market? What's the sales process like? It seems like from the outset very product led. Like one leads to the other. It's an actual problem you're solving. People come to you. You probably don't have a large sales force that's going knocking on doors.
Yeah, we still, I would say, have grown largely by word of mouth. What's cool about like, what's really cool about working, I'd say particularly on the media and entertainment side, a little bit less on tech, or it's like the different kind of transaction, I guess, on the tech side. But what's really interesting, I think, about working in media is that people don't generally go into media unless they love media, right? Like you don't like people who work in the music industry love music because there's so much terrible, like just historical uh, infrastructure baggage of the music industry, of how it works, of like the lack of rights transparency, all this kind of stuff. Like you really have to love music to work in music. And it means that when people in music find something that they love, they tell their friends about it because they're so excited about it. And we really found that when we started, it was really, really important to us. I think as creatives, like I said, like both Luke and I play music. We're both published authors. Like we deeply value creative work. And it was really important to us in building something with AI that we build alongside industry and that we not ever have people feel like they were having something imposed on them. And because I saw when I worked at Google, I worked on book search and I had a team at YouTube, and you would just see over and over again how, sure, these really cool technology innovations, um, like they could be quite disrespectful, I think, of creatives and the creative process. And I think there's a balance because I think if everyone always signed off on everything, in some ways things would not happen. On the other hand, um, that's a pretty violent experience, I think, to have as an artist, where people are taking your work and taking something that you poured a lot of emotional and physical labor into, and then just saying, well, this is the way things are now, right? Without really, at least without engaging with you in the conversation. So it was really important to us when we were doing something like separating content, right? Separating, which is content is art, right? Separating art, that we took that technology first to artists and rights owners, and that let them play with the technology and see how it could help them with reimagining work, with new kinds of distribution and monetization, and see that there was really a there. That was incredibly important to us and remains incredibly important to us. And I think that sounds, you were talking about VC earlier, I think that kind of language sounds very airy-fairy, like intangible, like, it doesn't sound like a money thing, and it sounds sort of philosophical, and probably people would think that would be a really bad business strategy. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I think where it really was, where it's been very helpful, is I think people very much see us as true partners and want to build with us and work with us and collaborate and understand that we're trying to solve real problems in their industry. And off of the back of that, the partnership then deepens. And that's been incredibly helpful. Again, it started very much just from a genuine philosophical perspective. Like, we knew there was a way to grow much faster, and we took the alternative path, which was to build with the people who build the content, right? And that's remained true to AudioShake that's been there from the start.
I mean, a VC who really wants to dig a little deeper than just a 5-minute call would understand that this is like, it gives you a certain authenticity also, not a certain, like, it gives you
It does
authenticity
now. Yeah, it
like
does now.
respect
But I
with
think,
the,
yeah, no, absolutely. That's what I'm saying, though. It was because
yeah,
the question was around, like, how do you grow? Like, the hypothesis we had was that, but it also came from an ethical point of view, right? Which is like, what kind of company do you want to build? Because, like, the easy business answer is go build the thing that requires no cooperation and no conversation at all, right? So if you were only optimizing for economic upside, that's 99% of the time what you should be doing. But if you feel like there is an ethical component to what you're doing, combined with you feel like it's smart business to be a good partner to the people that you're working with, then I think that's a more sustainable business model too. But like,
there you
it
go.
it it came out of just, again, like, this is the kind of work that we ourselves do in our private lives. Like, it just made sense to us intuitively to do it that way.
Final question: what's in store for 2026? Anything you can disclose? Any things that are up for launch? Any new features, partnerships that you can, tell us here?
Yeah, we're pretty excited. We're headed to NAB really soon in Vegas. Not excited about the Vegas part, but excited about the showing off some of the things. We have a pretty fantastic copyright compliance system that a lot of media companies are using to be able to remove, to detect and remove music, to get the accurate rights information from it, to be able to then replace that, so they can then push that content to much broader audiences. And we can do that again in real time or in post-production. We're also going to be showing a lot of our real-time tech at NAB, and showing some of the new improvements there. So yeah, we're more separations, faster and faster is probably a way to sum up 2026.
All right. Well, that was super, super interesting. I learned a ton. Thank you so much for doing this, Jessica. Thank you.